Episode 134, Adam G. Fleming. Good morrow, and welcome back to the realm. I'm epic fantasy author J.V. Hilliard, and today I have a very special guest, a guy I met online in a Facebook group for science fiction and fantasy writers and have since become fast friends. He writes in fantasy, he writes in sci-fi, and he writes in something that's his own genre known as fantasy steampunk. So if you're interested in learning more about that and perhaps meeting your first sculptor, tune into this episode of The Realm. Adam, welcome to The Realm.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure having you, man. And this is one of these stories where we met online through a mutual friend of ours, and Michael Evans. And this is a guy that specializes in bringing sci-fi and fantasy authors together through his Facebook group. But it's also a place where I have found a lot of talented people that write a lot of great books. So I'm ready to get into some of that with you. But before we get started, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your authorship and where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Adam G. Fleming. I'm from Northern Indiana, married with 4 kids, and work not only as an author, obviously, but as a ghostwriter and a leadership coach and book coach. Tell you a little bit about my books. I think it's 16 titles now that are out, and with box sets and so forth, there's probably 20 or more options now on Amazon. But the best place to find my books, obviously, is at adamgfleming.com.
Well, look, let's transition into a little bit about you. What I found interesting in your bio is you are the first sculptor that I've had on the show. So tell us a little bit about that craft and that art and what drew you to it.
I've always been interested in a lot of different arts. And at one point, I ran into an older gentleman who was a retired mason. And he said, hey, we have this Wednesday night thing where you can come over to my studio, use my tools, and you can try it out for $7 on a Wednesday night. And it was fun. It's really cool to mess around with alabaster and talc and limestone and stuff like that.
Again, thanks for sharing on that. But let's talk about your authorship. I've started into Old Road's New Friends. Tell us what inspired that a little bit. That's a different spin than I expected when I picked up the book. I wanted to learn a little bit more about the inspiration behind it.
Yeah, Old Road's New Friends. I would call it sort of a travelogue / series of essays on the concept of the Camino de Santiago, which is a 1,100-year-old hiking route, series of hiking routes. There's not just one of them. The one that I took before I wrote that book was from Porto, Portugal, up into Spain. So that's about a 260-kilometer hike. And there's a couple times in this walk where you're just on this super old 2,000-year-old road, and you're seeing these paving stones that are, humongous, and they're still there. And then at the same time that you're walking on this really ancient road, you're meeting these brand new friends, other people with a backpack on, and they're, owning a fish restaurant in Germany, or they're a retired CFO from Ireland. And you're making these friendships and connections just all around hiking together. It's an incredible experience.
That is super cool. Just a cool opportunity. And folks that travel always interested, because I think that traveling begets additional creativity. And speaking of creativity, talk about the Satchel Pond Chronicles for a little bit and what kind of gave you the idea for it.
Yeah, so I was writing this other novel that's sort of an alternative history, trade fiction piece. And I've been working on that for 10 years. So there's a rock band in this book, and I wanted the rock band to sing about some oddball, obscure steampunk novel written by a sort of hermit-like artist in the backwoods of Indiana. And so I started writing Satchel Pong and the Great Migration, and I wrote about 85% of this thing, and then I went back to it a year later as I was working on the other novel, and I read through it, and I was like, this is cool. Like, why wouldn't I just publish this? Next thing I know, I've got 5 completed books in the Satchel Pond Chronicles, and the other book's still not done. So that's how that came
They're
about.
never done. They're never done. That doesn't work that way. For those that are watching that don't know what steampunk is a version of fantasy that incorporates almost true history with almost true kind of retro futuristic technology, but it gives you sort of like a time frame of the 19th century. Am I correct in that?
So some steampunk worlds are kind of set in London in the Victorian era. My steampunk world is the technology of Victorian London in a fantasy world. So,
Did I just hear you right? Did you create your own sub genre with fantasy steampunk?
of course,
That's great.
yeah.
So let me spin this a little different way because I don't have book coaches slash writing coaches on often. But since you're on, I'm going to ask you one question, both sides of the coin. What is your best piece of advice for an aspiring author? And what is the one thing that you would tell them never to do?
So I think the best advice is to not worry at all about whether or not anybody's going to like it or whether it will make any money. Operate instead out of the certainty that some people will not like it and write it because you like it.
Well, that's sage advice. That's exactly what we're looking for here.
Now, once you got that behind you, so then what should they never do?
Yes.
Never publish a book, even if it's indie published, without hiring a second set of eyes to edit it. Or barter if you have to. Sure. If you don't have cash, barter that editing process, but at least one other person has to look through it.
So as a guy who writes over multiple genres, I mean, do you have a favorite? I mean, is there a place that you find that you would call home?
Yeah, so my author tagline is walking the fine line between the absurd and the sublime. And therefore, like, the genre doesn't matter to me as much as if I'm having fun being both absurd and sharing with people, I guess, my worldview that life can be beautiful.
Good. Well, look, man, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to enter what we do every time here. It's called the lightning round. I'm going to ask you 4 or 5 questions, pretty quick answers, one word, one sentence. So
that's fine.
Are you ready to go into the lightning round?
Yeah, let's take a crack at it.
All right. The first one's an easy one because we talked about sculpting before. Who is your favorite sculptor and what is your favorite sculpture?
So 2 ways to look at that. So I have a bunch of coffee table books of this guy named Andy Goldsworthy, and he's really interesting because he sculpts in nature with nature. So he'll find a place with a bunch of fallen leaves that are red, orange, yellow, and then he'll just take them and very carefully place them on a little puddle of water. So one gust of wind can make him start all over from scratch. He then takes photographs of it, and then, a day later, it's gone. It's not the kind of sculpture I ever did, but I've always found his work really beautiful.
Yeah. All right. Next question. Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones.
I didn't expect that, but that's a good one. All right. Last question. You find yourself in a magical library, and when you walk in, you find a quill. And with that quill, you can change the ending of one book. What book would it be, and what ending would you change, and what would you change it to?
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. I read something that was a Pulitzer Prize finalist called Erasure, and there's a recent movie out in theaters called American Fiction. I don't want to go into describing it. I would rewrite that book by not using Latin on the last line. Let me just leave it that.
Good. Well, Adam, thank you very much for being on The Realm. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. All right, my friend.
Okay. Take care.
Take it easy, brother. Well, I told you Adam was going to be a pretty entertaining interview, and I've got to say, this is a guy that has something for stones, right? He's a sculptor. He was talking about the Roman roads he was walking on. And speaking of roads, I will be in Richmond, Virginia, starting at the end of March for GalaxyCon. Come and find me there, and we will be releasing book 4 in the Warminster series, Echoes of Ghostwood. If you want to meet me, get your copy of it, or get the box set of all 4, come and find me. End of March, GalaxyCon, Richmond, Virginia. And again, to our followers, thank you again for lending me your ear. And until next time, I'm J.V. Hilliard, and may your gods go with you.